Tri-State Generation and Transmission in Westminster, Colorado. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
Support for this episode comes from Hubble Utility Solutions, who would like to share that if you're an avid podcast listener, check out their podcast titled Power Pods, one word, from Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. 2020 is obviously an important election year, and as we get further into the summer, we look at efforts underway to make sure rural Americans and all electric cooperative members have the opportunity to have their voices heard at the polls. This episode of the podcast is going to be a two-part series. In the first segment, Laura Vogel, who does grassroots advocacy at NRECA, and Brian Miller of nonprofit Vote talk about their work to encourage rural residents to engage in the issues and vote in elections. In part two, we'll hear from Stephanie Johnson of Jasper County REMC in Indiana about what these efforts look like on the ground. Laura and Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay, so Laura, tell us about Co-ops Vote. What is it? When did it start?
Yeah, Co-ops Vote is a program that we started to encourage rural voters to go to the polls each and every election day. It came out of a discussion that we had that found that voter turnout was declining more rapidly in rural areas than it was in urban areas, which meant that there was also a decline in representation for those rural communities versus the urban communities. So we decided to develop this program simply to encourage voters to go to the polls in these rural areas. And we're not telling them who to vote for, how to vote, anything like that. It's a nonpartisan program that really just educate our members on what the issues are that are affecting their communities, and then asking them to go to the polls and vote for elected officials and candidates that really represent their rural communities.
And so when was it that these declining turnout rates got onto our radar, and when did we start the Co-ops Vote program?
So we started in earnest in 2016. We unveiled the program at our annual meeting. And before that, we kind of led up to it with some of the research and things like that, the background, all of that in late 2015. And that's when it kind of started to resonate with us.
And Brian, your group, the nonprofit Vote, tell us a little bit about the work you do. How long have you guys been around, and what kind of resources do you provide to your constituents?
Sure. I think much like the work of Co-ops Vote and the work that's happening that Laura's working with around the country, the work that we're doing is basically rooted in the notion of a trusted messenger. The rural co-op that you're a part of is someone that you know. It's a known actor. It's a known person or entity that you've got a relationship with. And we basically leverage that same relationship with nonprofits around the country. So we work with, United Way agencies, community health agencies, housing clinics, food pantries, a wide array of human service nonprofits around the country to help them engage the communities that they serve. And so what we do on the mechanics of that is we do webinars, we train their staff how to stay nonpartisan, we help them build out toolkits, we help them build out the infrastructure that they need to comply with, state rules around registration and state rules around get out to vote efforts. And, I think much like what Laura's saying here as far as the rural communities, once a community starts declining in participation, there's this negative feedback loop that takes root because political campaigns only contact people with a history of voting. They're not going to spend a lot of time sending mailers, calling, or encouraging folks to vote who haven't voted in the last two election cycles, right? And so like a lot of the communities Laura's referencing, in the rural communities that maybe voter turnout is going down, that's going to reinforce itself. And so it's really up to the co-ops and in our case, the nonprofits and others around the country to be that messenger to make sure the communities they serve remain engaged in our broader civic dialogue.
Laura, you mentioned earlier that one of the reasons that you started Co-ops Vote is to sort of get at the why of why voter representation and voter activity among rural communities was going down. Did you get any answers on that? Do you have a sense of why that's happening? And Brian, we'll come to you for kind of a more national look.
Yeah, so I think part of the problem here is that it becomes sort of a vicious cycle. They say, people aren't listening to me. My voice isn't heard, so why should I go vote? It really doesn't matter at the end of the day. And so it kind of turns into a circle, if you will, of not voting and then not being heard and then not voting and then not being heard. And so we really felt the need to try to change that cycle by letting people know that if they become educated on the issues and then really start to engage with those candidates that are out there and discussing those issues, that they'll feel more involved in the cycle and they'll want to go vote at the end of the day.
And Brian, you work with lots of different nonprofits. Are you seeing sort of the same things? Do you have other insights on why voters tend to get themselves sort of disenfranchised over time?
Yeah, I think Laura summed it up pretty well in that it is that vicious cycle. If you don't have a history of voting, campaigns and candidates are not going to spend the money to call you. Because think about it. A political campaign, their goal is to win an election. They only have so much money. They only have so much time. So they're going to prioritize people with a history of voting, which again means that communities that haven't been voted don't get the same level of communication as others. And that, I think, is the challenge.
And Brian, are you working with a lot of electric cooperatives in what you do? Do these groups come to you and say, we need help, or do you go to them and say, can you help us?
Most of our mission focus as an organization is focused on nonprofits. So we mostly work with, again, United Way agencies, Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCAs, community health centers, and the like. And so most of our work with the co-ops has been through the work we do with National Voter Registration Day. But I will step back and say two things. One, we do a lot of work in rural communities, particularly with our work with community health centers, because a lot of health centers are set up to basically provide services to underserved rural communities. And through our partnership with a lot of these community health centers, we are reaching a lot of rural voters. And the second thing, I think, is tying back to while our resources are initially designed for a nonprofit, we find a wide array of people use them, a wide array of groups, including 501c12 co-op. We also have business associations that call us wanting to use our materials. Now legally a corporation can endorse candidates, but most of the time they don't want to, for good reason. They want to stay above the fray, just like a co-op. You don't want to alienate any segment of your membership. And so you can still push out a message that we value your voice and we want to make sure our community is represented. And our materials are really designed towards achieving that goal.
That's great. And so, Laura, you've mentioned a couple of times that you focus on issues. It's not like you're necessarily out there saying you have to vote, it's your duty, you have to vote. You're putting out the issues and saying, if this is important to you, make your voice known. Talk about how that philosophy works into Co-op's Vote and some of the other resources and the events and things that you do to kind of get that message out.
Sure. One of the most important things that we can do is provide those resources to these communities, because we don't want to have it be such a burden on them to try to be turning out the vote in addition to keeping the lights on, right? So we have things like flyers and, talking points that will help deliver the message. We can help put together PowerPoint presentations. I know this all sounds kind of basic and boring, but at the end of the day, those are the things that are going to help the communities around them and the consumer members that we serve understand how they can simply speak on behalf of the cooperative, on behalf of the community, by going to the polls on election day. So, there are issues that these communities are facing, like access to broadband and being able to have their kids do their homework the way kids in urban communities do, and being able to understand the technology there and then be a voice on behalf of the community. That's just one example. And so the thing that we try to do is break it down into very simple, easy to understand messaging that's so easy a caveman can do it kind of thing, and make sure then that the communities that they serve are acting on behalf of an issue like broadband or access to reliable, affordable electricity and similar things.
So when one of our co-ops comes to you and says, we want to do a voter registration event or we want to do a voter awareness event, what are the kind of things that you offer them? And then sort of walk us through what a typical co-op voter event would look like.
Oh, yeah. They run the gamut. They could be anything from inviting an elected official to come and do a tour of the co-op, all the way to having some kind of candidate forum, to even just hosting a table at a community event that explains what a co-op is and why their vote matters. We've found that a lot of the cooperatives have gotten really creative in what they're doing and things that we are not even thinking about. For example, I just got wind of a co-op in Georgia that is going to be doing a read-along for their younger members, kind of like we've seen some of these celebrities reading goodnight books now that we're all home due to the pandemic. And so they took it upon themselves to have a read along of the Dr. Seuss, I vote, you vote, we all vote. And I'm really excited to see what that looks like at the end of the day and how that turns out.
So co-ops are doing these kinds of things. Associations across the country are doing these kinds of things. What is the importance of voting here? What led you both to be such strong advocates for it, and why, in a philosophical way, is it such an important thing?
I think there is a core principle that our work certainly is rooted in, which is that our democracy works better when more people participate and vote. And that same reinforcing process that we talked about, in that, if people are not being contacted about elections because they haven't been voting, they become disengaged. As we reverse that process and as people start becoming engaged, they also start learning more about issues that are important to them. And then we have, decision making that is more representative of the broad swath of Americans.
Yeah, I'll just tack on to that, with a little bit of a personal anecdote. I was raised in a household that was just what you did, and so I never really had the opportunity to come to the decision of why I should vote. It was always just instilled in me that voting is part of your civic duty. And because you're an American citizen, you get this amazing right to go and choose the people that represent you. And so for me, it was kind of a no-brainer from the start. But then being able to kind of understand what Brian is getting to, and some of these folks out there that believe their vote doesn't matter, and so they just don't go vote, and trying to instill some of what I learned as a kid, even to take that back to these folks and say that your vote does matter, and just go and give it a try. See how it makes you feel.
That's a great point. I want to get into the nonpartisan nature of the work you do next, but let's pause quickly for a word from our sponsor.
NRECA's Along Those Lines podcast is supported by Hubble Utility Solutions, presenting this message. If you enjoy listening to podcasts, check out a new show from Hubble Utility Solutions titled Power Pods. Power Pods, one word, delivers compelling stories about the history of electrical products as well as perspectives from industry leaders. To listen, subscribe to Power Pods, one word, from Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.
I'm Christmas Wharton from Grand Valley Power in Grand Junction, Colorado. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. Laura and Brian, you both have mentioned how the initiatives you work on are very deliberate in being nonpartisan. Why is that important, particularly now, given how polarized the political environment is? Why is it important to emphasize that part of the program? Brian, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, for 501c3 organizations, first off, it's legally required. You can't endorse or oppose a candidate for public office. But even if we could, there's a lot of reasons not to. And those reasons really are about, if you want people to be open to the message, you need to come at it from an inclusive viewpoint. Once you state, some bias in your communications, you've immediately alienated a third to half of your audience, right? Which is why I think we have a lot of corporate partners. And again, corporations can legally endorse candidates, but most of them work to keep their communications around voting and elections nonpartisan for other reasons, because they want to make sure that they're getting the right message out about, a full and robust and healthy democracy really requires all of us and all of our viewpoints, different as they may be, to be a part of that dialogue.
And I want to jump back to something that Brian said kind of right at the beginning about being a trusted messenger. And co-op, we are the trusted messenger many, many times for many, many different things. And if we were to turn to a partisan nature of any kind, I think we would lose the validity of being that trusted messenger. Right now, our members, our consumer members, they listen to what we say. And if we were to suddenly turn this into a vote for so-and-so kind of situation, I feel like we would lose any sort of trust that we have when it comes to being involved politically. And I will add that being involved politically does not mean being involved in a partisan manner.
And now, Brian, you're involved in the National Voter Registration Day campaign. You mentioned that earlier. That's coming up in September. Tell us a little about what it is and what kind of events and resources are involved with that program.
Sure. National Voter Registration, it was originally founded in 2012. It takes place on the fourth Tuesday of every September. So this year that's September 22nd. And it's really just a single day of coordinated media and field events across the country. And because so many people are involved, we're able to, sort of break through whatever the media noise is of the day and get everyone's attention focused on registering to vote before the various state registration deadlines start kicking in. Those deadlines start kicking in. The earliest ones are in early October. So we intentionally made this holiday a week and a half before those earliest deadlines, so that whatever state you're in, you can register to vote on that day. Many of the digital media partners are very active and engaged. So come National Voter Registration Day, you will most likely see something on your Facebook feed about today being a great day to register to vote. You will most likely see something, whatever your social media platform is of choice, you're going to see something on there about National Voter Registration Day. And so by working with all these various partners, we can really have an outsized impact. One of the things we do at Nonprofit Vote in partnership with Co-ops Vote is we encourage, co-ops and community partners, rural schools, health centers, et cetera, across the country to sign up as National Voter Registration Day community partners. And those community partners, we send them all kits of posters and stickers, legal guides on how to go about doing voter registration, where to get those registration forms, and basically little organizing kits that they can take out to their co-op, to their school, or other community center. Thousands of groups across the country are doing these kind of in-person voter registration efforts at the same time that the big digital media platforms are lighting up the internet. And so registered over 800,000 in 2018, and we also registered over 600,000 last year, which was impressive. We're anticipating registering over 1 million this year as part of National Voter Registration Day.
Laura, Brian mentioned how you guys have been working together. Talk about some of the specifics in terms of what you're going to be doing for Voter Registration Day.
Yeah, so like Brian said, he and the team over at National Voter Registration Day are really great about providing the materials and the legal guidelines and all of that. So I serve kind of as a facilitator with the co-ops to encourage them to sign up as a community partner to host a voter registration drive on Voter Registration Day. And then, I coordinate with the National Voter Registration Day folks to make sure that they are getting that information out to our cooperatives.
And Laura, do you have a sense on whether you're moving the needle with Co-ops Vote in terms of getting people to the polls? I know 2016, there was record rural turnout. Do you feel like that was in part because of your efforts, and are you able to sort of measure how you're doing on this score?
Yeah, so we did actually do some research after the 2016 election, and we were able to determine that we helped add about 500,000 rural voters to the polls on Election Day in 2016, which when you break it down by co-op in some of those communities, that's not a small number by any means. And we know that we had a similar impact in 2018, and we'll probably do research again after the 2020 election just to ensure that we're continuing that sort of upward trend again. And we were really excited about the way that folks embraced the program and then really did help do the turnout. We couldn't have been more pleased, and we continue to see the growth of the program and its success.
Okay, so for both of you, the pandemic, I'm sure, has had a huge impact on your efforts. How has it changed and impacted your efforts so far, and what have you done to sort of compensate, doing like social media campaigns, things like that?
Well, I think, we have, since the pandemic started in spring, we looked at how we can adapt our voter engagement work to these possible realities, because we don't know what's going to happen in September. We don't know if it's going to have settled down, if we're going to have another flare-up. And so we're preparing for both possibilities. Even if there is in-person, people are going to be encouraged to take precautions. So one of the things we're looking at is having, PPEs for folks who are doing voter engagement stuff, encouraging folks to use pins that they can give away, and having extra signage for those in-person events. And part of our agreements that we're asking all our groups to do is whatever their state rules are for in-person events, that they obviously comply with that. So if there's a line to get to the registration table, that they have adequate spacing. So we are prepared for the possibility that in-person events will be possible with certain precautions, and we're encouraging our partners to do that. But at the same time, we're also building out a lot of online infrastructure to do voter engagement work online. And that's going to look different in different states, because I think at this point, the vast majority of states have online voter registration, provided you have a current ID. So I think last count was 40 states in D.C. basically have some form of online voter registration. 10 states, however, still only allow you to register to vote by paper. But you could still fill out an online form that will allow you to print and mail a PDF that you would print out locally on your home computer, sign, put a stamp on, and mail it. But we're also prepared for some possibility that folks don't have a stamp. A lot of folks don't have stamps. There's a certain generation that's not accustomed to using stamps, or maybe their printer's out of ink. One of the things we're preparing for is the possibility that that may be wide. How do we address that? And so we're building out the infrastructure that folks can request, a printed pre-postage voter registration form be mailed to them as part of this effort. So we're looking at a lot of different tools to both prepare for the possibility that some in-person engagement is going to be possible this fall, but also that we may have to move certain portions of this work online. And it's going to be a both-and strategy. We're hoping to have both elements of those engaged come September, August and September, as the real registration drives heat up.
And I'll add on to that, from the co-op perspective here, the tools and services that National Voter Registration Day and Nonprofit Vote are providing to understand how to do this in this current environment are vital to what we're doing. And I think it's important to note that, again, the co-op can be a really great way to disseminate that information into the communities that they serve. So if we end up in a situation that certain states are taking registration and even voting to some kind of mail-in ballot situation, if the co-op has that information ahead of time, they can disseminate that. And it does change from state to state. And where we've found the information that Brian and his team are putting together is very valuable, because I can direct our state associations and our cooperatives to those websites and encourage them to click on their particular state and familiarize themselves with the rules and the research that has been done. And then I'm also encouraging them to go to their state voting website to understand better that information. But again, they're the ones that can then disseminate, as the trusted messenger, that information so that there isn't a drop-off in voting or registering or any confusion, so that that registration is valid, and then that ballot and voting is valid in every election.
And if I can pick up on what Laura's saying there, most of what I was referencing earlier was about the registration process. But yes, when we get to November, it's going to be a very different game this year. And again, it's going to vary by state. But one thing we know for sure, a lot more people are going to vote by mail this year. Last election cycle, I think it was 25% of all votes cast in the country were done by mail. A lot of Western states already are at 100% or close to 100%, states like Utah, where it's pretty much an all vote by mail state. But it's a very unfamiliar process for a lot of folks they've never done it. How do you do it? How do you request a ballot? How does this work? What's the deadline for sending it in? And so that's where co-ops can come in and be that real trusted messenger to help educate, because there's going to be a massive task of educating people how to vote in this very different way and very unfamiliar way for many people. And so, to make sure that those rural votes are included in part of the process, co-ops can be part of that education front line to help their members make use of this, depending on whether they're in a state where that's going to be expanding. And a lot of states are expanding on that front.
Given the situation with the uncertainty regarding whether people are going to be able to vote in person, are you both expecting, from your vantage point, are you expecting a voter turnout that's either a record setter or close to what we had in 2016?
Yes.
Go with Laura's answer. Yes.
I want to say that I think that a lot of people realize that their vote does matter, and that they can do what they need to do in their communities, and they'll do it by going to the polls.
That's great. I love the work you guys are doing, and I really appreciate you guys coming on the podcast and kind of enlightening us about what's going on out there. Thanks so much for being on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
And thanks as well to our sponsor, Hubble, and to you, our listeners. Be sure to check out the second part of this episode for a look at how these efforts play out on the ground. For more on this and other podcasts, visit us at electric.coop. Until next time, I'm Scott Hoffman.
I'm Scott Adair from Jackson Purchase Energy in Paducah, Kentucky. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.